One.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Thank you for joining us. This is the reality show for February 14th. So, of course, Valentine's Day, we're talking about love. No, we're not. Because our allies, we are all Israel now. Our allies are not getting the love today. They're not getting the love from where? From Ireland, from the Irish. What the hell? We got a few stories about Ireland and the Irish and the way in which they are not supporting Israel. In fact, they are coming down against Israel in substantial ways. I'm going to start with the lightest story, the first one on our list. The headline: Basketball Ireland. Did you know they play basketball in Ireland? Huh. Basketball Ireland placed in, quote, difficult situation over Israel fixture. Well, it turns out that Eurobasket, I guess that's European basketball, Eurobasket, their matches, Basketball Ireland facing pressure to boycott over the Israel-Gaza war. I'm starting it off light intentionally. This is heavy stuff. This is serious stuff, and I'm going to get a little bit dramatic. So before I do, I want to welcome to our panel, the reality show for February 14th, Michael Liebowitz. How are you doing this fine day?
I could be better, but I'll be okay.
Good. Well, we're counting on you. And John Wass, the artist John Wass. Welcome to the reality show. How are you doing on this fine Wednesday?
I'm doing well.
So, again, I'm starting it off light, but it really is as heavy as it gets. It's just a basketball game, right? Who cares? Well, they started a basketball game, and the Irish team refused to go to the center of the court where the teams go when the national anthems are played. The game went ahead, but Ireland refused to shake hands with the Israel team and lined up for the pre-match anthem beside the team's bench rather than on the court. What the hell? When asked to reflect on the controversy, Chief Executive Feehan, who said the Irish team would face heavy fines and expulsion from the competition if the team boycotted their fixtures with Israel, said he felt, well, we have done what is right for the sport. Now, it sounds kind of ridiculous. You've got a bunch of pro-Gaza, some people say pro-Palestinian, which I think is the incorrect way to look at it, folks on the Irish basketball team. It turns out this goes much deeper and is telling us much more than we realize. And if I can be a little vulgar, this shit can't stand. The match buildup was fraught with tension, Israel coach Sharon Ducker said. Ireland, now this is from the Israeli coach. This is the right thing to say. They did not respect what the game symbolizes after the Irish players expressed their concerns about playing player Dorseyar, an Israeli basketball player, said that the Ireland team was quite anti-Semitic. Guys, this is basketball, almost as American as baseball. No, this is European basketball, and the Irish team is whining. This was not like, well, I won't go into the comparisons. What the actual hell? Michael, when you saw this story, what did you think?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I think these people are gutless cowards, because if they really believe that the Israelis are genocidal oppressors, then don't play at all.
Right.
Just say, no, you're disgusting. We are not going to sanction you. We want nothing to do with you. But they don't want to do that. They want a half step. They want to try to play both sides. Well, we won't shake hands, but we'll play the game. So that's the first thing, is they're just gutless. And then I didn't know that there's kind of a long history in Ireland of anti-Semitism or anti-Israeli sentiment.
Indeed.
But a big key to me is, in the write-up that we read, it talked about, why do countries that share our values, or why do countries that share our values turn against other countries with the same values? The problem is the bad mixture of values, right? Because none of the countries are actually pure. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, you've got countries, America's got over 300 million people. Not everybody is going to share the same exact values, but you can have a general cultural ethos. the general cultural ethos is extremely mixed. It's tinged strongly with collectivism, with some envy, some identity politics, some pseudo individualism. And when you put that mix together, you never know what's going to end up happening or where you're going to come out. It reminds me of Leonard Peikoff when he wrote that people who try to live with a mixture of faith and reason will turn to faith in the exact moments when they need reason the most. And I think it's a similar situation. When you have mixed values, you'll sell out your good values right when they're needed the most.
Just so. John, what did you think when you read these stories? I don't know if you were familiar with past Irish anti-Semitism, and we'll get into some of the backstory of that, where that really showed going back all the way to World War II. But what was your impression of this story?
I thought it was pretty ridiculous. And yeah, Michael makes a great point that they are very cowardly. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to punish the people that they think are mean, and then they want to also play their basketball like nothing's going on. Um, and what I just wonder, what do they think they're going to accomplish? Like, oh, big deal. They won't play basketball with them, as if that's supposed to convince everyone to quit supporting Israel. Give me a break. Um, they, I just don't see what it was to accomplish. It's so collectivist, to hold those players guilty for what their government does. Isn't that collective punishment that they're all up in arms about? I don't know. It's pure collectivism and tribalism in my mind. But I
You know,
also think that, like Michael said, it's a mix. Why do Western countries and the West in general um, have such conflicting values, and their values are actually contradictory. Um, self, the value of self-sacrifice contradicts all other values. So even just a little bit of that self-sacrifice in there is going to come out in ways just like we're seeing.
did Ireland boycott the Beijing Olympics by any chance? They refused to go there and sanction the communist Chinese who oppress their own people and commit at least a quasi genocide against the Uyghurs over there? Was Ireland, morally outraged at that so that they didn't go, or did they refuse to shake hands with I don't know, the Cuban team or the Venezuelan team or any of the other teams that represent collectivist commie regimes around the world?
It's a good question. I would have to make a quick search here. They did boycott. Nope, that's 1936. I'm not seeing them. No, no, I am not seeing them on the list of those who boycotted the Beijing Olympics.
It's
Go
funny,
figure.
right? Yeah.
Even their neighbors, the UK, you good people over there did that, but somehow Ireland is not in the list.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how everybody is so outraged by the hardships of war when it comes to Israel, but not when it comes to all these other conflicts that are going on around the world. When it's Israel, all of a sudden it's reprehensible.
Right. Exactly right. And we'll get into the history a bit more, but I want to say real quick, speaking, for the organization, let's see here. Sorry, I've got 3 pages here. There we go. Yeah, the Basketball Ireland said the comments were inflammatory and wholly inaccurate. That our player Dorsey are Israel's player Dorsey are actually I think she's an American playing for the Israeli team. Uh, when asked to reflect on the controversy, Feehan felt he has done what's right for the sport. And again, the association is going to condemn the team for doing what they did. There will be sanctions. If they refuse to play with Israel, they will be thrown out of the conference. All that's good. I'm not sure any of it was principled. And that gets us into the next story. Here's your headline here from The Guardian. Ireland and Spain among EU nations striking a different note on Gaza war. Well, now we have Ireland and Spain to talk about. In taking alternative direction of the likes of the US and the UK, the group has played a role in shifting perspectives on the conflict. We have, of course, been talking about this on the Ayn Rand Center UK since the news of what's been going on in UNRWA and their complicity, and in some cases, active involvement in the October 7th attacks. Okay, back to the quote from The Guardian. When the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees became embroiled in a scandal last month, embroiled in a scandal. Oh, yeah, they were part of the slaughter. Britain and Germany quickly froze their funding, and other countries on the continent soon followed. But instead of joining the pact, Spain and Portugal decided to go the opposite direction. They responded with promises to up their funding. And then further on, Ireland is also involved in these protests against what's been going on with UNRWA. Now, I have had people argue with me that whatever some few people in UNRWA's involvement was, whether it was the dozen who were actively involved in October 7th, or, maybe the 100 who are involved in pro-Hamas, from education to actual protests, it's still the smallest part of what UNRWA does. And those people need that humanitarian support. Let me start with you, Michael. What would your answer be? What is your answer to those who say, well, UNRWA's mission is too important to let a few bad apples end it?
Well, let me start with some left-wing stuff, right? Because and not just left-wing, but some libertarian stuff. How
Good.
many posts have I seen online criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu for allowing aid to go into Gaza from Qatar, because that aid that was going to the Palestinians also went to Hamas? They've crucified Netanyahu, basically accused him of deliberately funding Hamas. So that's horrible. Then the argument isn't, well, as long as it gets to some good people, it's okay that it gets to some bad people. But again, when it's Israel, it's the double standard. If you're funding an organization that's anti-Israel, if it gets to the bad guys, so what? If the Israelis do something similar, it's horrible. Somebody else does it, it's justified. It's the double standard that exists internationally in the UN, which is just more of an example on why these organizations are garbage. And I really just wish the United States would stop funding them. Now, look, I'm against all foreign aid. So I happen to love it when I'm in a debate with somebody and about Israel, and they say, oh, yeah, well, then why don't you stop funding Israel? And I say, well, actually, I would support it because I'm not for any foreign aid. But especially, I mean, you need to stop funding organizations and countries that are directly going against our interest and the interest of our allies, if you're not going to just stop it altogether, which I ultimately am for.
Yeah, I think that's a compelling point, that it should stop, but if it's going to happen, it shouldn't be treasonous. John, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I thought the Spanish, I don't know if it was actually the prime minister or the diplomat that wrote to the UN agency, but they made the point that that the other countries like Spain and Portugal and Ireland that are joining this anti-Israel pact, I guess, he says it's an important counterweight against the usual suspects, the pro-American countries who tend to be more pro-Israel. But there are other member states who are just behind them and share the same positions, like Slovenia, Portugal, Malta, and Luxembourg. So there's this slow trickle of people joining their side against Israel. And their main concern is that Israel isn't complying with the human rights obligations under its trade agreement with the EU. Well, they should get out of the EU then. They said, we have been equally clear that Israel has a right to defend itself from such attacks, but this may only be exercised in line with international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The response must comply with the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. The horrendous terrorist attacks committed by Hamas and other armed groups do not and cannot justify any breach in IHL. in the military response with the resulting consequences for the civilian population in Gaza. You cannot make war civilized. Hamas is relying on the West, trying though. Their entire strategy seems to be making it impossible for Israel to follow HIL, international humanitarian law. And they will not win if they do not follow IHL. So they're in a lose-lose situation. I think what part of the problem is a lot of these Western countries see the concept civilian as interchangeable with the concept of innocent, and then, military is obviously evil. So this feeds and supports their narrative, and they only see it in this intrinsic way of the smaller is always the right and the larger, stronger is always the wrong. But that is just an intrinsicist way of looking at it. So you don't have to actually judge individual situations.
Yeah, we can certainly get back into that idea that, well, obviously, the more powerful is the aggressor and the less powerful is the victim. And, tell that to the counter examples that make that obviously ridiculous are all around us. Just look at any shooting, these so-called mass shootings. Are we to say that because there's only one gunman, that's obviously the victim, and all of those people that were shot, they're obviously the oppressors? Well, they don't have the power. That is not the point. Look at the numbers. Okay, real quick. Let me quote from this article. More than a dozen states, including the US and Netherlands, have paused funding, prompting warnings of a complete collapse of aid provision to 2 million civilians, more than half of them children, in Gaza. The children are the victims. The children are the victims. That's absolutely right. I mentioned this on Yaron Brook's show the other night in the comments, which he read and agreed with me. I think we make a mistake when we say, well, there aren't really any innocent people in Gaza. Maybe the really young children, but by the time they're old enough to be taught anything, they're taught to throw rocks at Israelis and want to grow up to kill them. No, that turns out to be wrong. In fact, I've shared stories about Hamas resistance fighters in Gaza. They're out there. There may not be many. But we make a mistake when we say there are no innocents in Gaza, because we are then giving Hamas a free pass on what they are doing to their own citizens. That's what I would say about that. So the article makes that point. In contrast, at least 7 European countries, including Luxembourg, Norway, Slovenia, cut that out, said they would continue to fund UNRWA. While these countries have been widely applauded online, the hell does that mean, widely applauded online? For their pro-Palestinian stance, Connectney, this is the European Middle East project manager, cautioned against characterizing them in this way. And then here's the quote here. Well, none of them have waved Palestinian flags or said the Palestinians should somehow be favored over the Israelis. I would say they are the countries that actually represent, or continue to represent, the traditional EU position on the conflict, that of support for the two-state solution. Again, I have every sympathy for any at least partially innocent people in Gaza. Who has the moral blame for those deaths? What can or should be done, even if you have sympathy for the slaughter going on? Slaughter is the wrong word. For the unfortunate deaths going on, for the war going on in Gaza. Michael, I know you sometimes have a little different slant on these things than
I actually agree with you.
Stereotypical response, but I'm wondering, what do you think of when you think of innocent people dying in Gaza?
Well, let me see if I can get my friend Jim Valiant, our friend Jim Valiant, to respond in all caps, as he is wont to do sometimes when I'm talking. I do think that there's innocent people in Gaza, and I do think it's a mistake to say there isn't. Children obviously are innocent. People that are opposed to Hamas, which I'm sure there are. And I don't even like the line of, well, they could stand up to their government, because I wonder how many of the people who say that would actually do it if they were in that situation. because you're talking about, risking certain death if you do that. And there's a reason we call people that stand up to governments in those situations heroes, right? Because it's not your run-of-the-mill person that's going to do it. And I do think that so long as it is within their interest to do it, I think Israel should minimize civilian casualties. I think they have to defeat Hamas, but when they can avoid killing civilians, they should. Now, if Hamas is hiding behind civilians, what are you going to do? I mean, I like you a lot, Robert, but if someone's hiding behind you shooting a gun at me, I'm going to fire back. I mean, look, I mean, ultimately, my life is more important to me than your life. And I hope it's likewise for you. So if Israel's in a situation where someone's shooting at someone from behind, behind civilians, you have to do something. But I don't think it's an absurd notion that you try to protect civilian life when you can. I think that's fair. I will say this, one of the things I really dislike about these things, and it's kind of personal for me, is when people count in their very criticisms of Israel, they count on Israel showing restraint. They say all these horrendous things about Israel, knowing ultimately that Israel's not going to do the types of things that Israel could do. And the reason I say it's personal is because I get criticized a lot online. People bring up the fact that I have a violent past from when I was, late teen, early 20s. But when they do that, they're taking for granted that I've changed. They're taking for granted, or they wouldn't say those things to me, because when I was that way, people didn't say these types of things to me, right? And it's the same type of thing, is that they're depending on it. As they criticize Israel, they're depending on them showing the type of restraint that a moral nation shows. And that, I think, is grotesque, and I think more attention needs to be called to it.
I think that's a brilliant point. James also mentioned in the previous show there, today's TDO, that um, to the extent there are innocents in Gaza, we need to remember who's responsible for that. And that presupposes, of course, that there are innocents in Gaza. 26,000 people now have been killed in Gaza. People like to run the numbers. Well, they only killed, I can't even finish the sentence because it's such an outrage to think of it in those terms, but I hear it. I hear it every day in every argument. John, I'm curious because I know you've said some very intelligent and nuanced things about the issue of innocence in Gaza and who is morally responsible for that as well. What are your thoughts on the topic?
Well, like you guys are saying, I think there are innocents, the children. One thing that I do think is overlooked a little bit is if the left and the world is so concerned with these Gazan children,
Yes.
then why isn't there an effort or an organizing campaign to get the children out of Gaza? No, they would rather feed and give money to their cultish parents who are keeping them in that situation. Imagine if this were Jim Jones or any other American cult. What would people be saying? No, we need, the police are attacking the Jim Jones compound. We need to give them food and money and, moral support. No, you need to get the damn children out of there because their parents are psycho. That's the only thing that keeps coming to mind when I hear people complain about all the children dying in Gaza. Their parents are going and killing Jews and then running and hiding behind their children. How are the Israelis ever going to follow international law when they do that? It's an impossible standard.
It's a brilliant comparison, and you can do this in any of a number of ways. Make those comparisons to reality, to real life, to the real world. If you can imagine that Cuba or any other neighboring nation of the United States, if Cuba, only 50 miles off the shore of Florida, started lobbing missiles at the United States and then sent over a bunch of people and killed 1,500 U.S. citizens, took 250 of us hostage over to the island of Cuba, That would be the end of Cuba. That would be the end of that nation. Nobody doubts it. And nobody doubts the rightness of that, except maybe a few really, really crazy communists out there. Somehow they can't make that comparison. So, John, you're absolutely right. If this was some cult, well, you tell me the difference between Hamas and a cult, including the way it plays out with so many of their believers. The fact that they are believers means all the children should be slaughtered? No. No, the only reason children are dying is because Hamas started a war. The only reason why any of this is happening. And Michael, you're right. Why aren't people calling on Hamas to end this war? Do you have a sense of what their answer is when you tell them, well, this could end tomorrow. Hamas needs to release the hostages and surrender?
Well,
Michael,
it
what
depends. It
do you think?
depends who you're ultimately talking to. I mean, you could end up just going down a real rabbit hole where they then say, yes, but what about what Israel did 5 years ago? And then you can explain that. And then, well, what about 10? And you end up going all the way back until you're, in Nebuchadnezzar's time. So if somebody is hell bent on hating Israel, they're going to hate Israel, right? And there's really not much you can say to them. That's what they do. They dislike Israel, and they're going to figure out reasons to hate them. I do want to address one thing, and I agree by and large with the idea that Hamas is responsible for civilian casualties. But I want to make it clear that, in my view, that's in the normal course of war, because I could certainly foresee circumstances, given the history of war and, past wars that every war I've ever heard of, where individual Israeli soldiers could misbehave and might kill some innocent civilian or harm some innocent civilian. And if some soldier consciously makes the decision to do that, that's not on Hamas. That's on that soldier. I'm not saying it has happened. I'm just saying that I could see something like that happening. And if it did, I just want to be clear that that person is still morally culpable. It doesn't just go in a straight line from, look, Hamas did this, so therefore whatever we do to whomever we do it is justified.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because not only do we need to keep context and be willing to acknowledge that things happen, but it makes the contrast that much more stark. When Israeli soldiers misbehave, if that happens, they aren't, well, they, like in any war, they're not punished by the enemy. They're punished by their own military. Now imagine for a second if, see, you try to make the comparison and it's just going to sound like a joke, but it's not. Imagine for a second if a soldier of Hamas misbehaved, went too far, killed somebody that didn't deserve to be killed.
They'd
Would
be
they be punished?
celebrated.
They'd be
No,
celebrated. That's
they'd
what
be
October
celebrated on
7th
the streets of
was
Gaza.
the killing
Yes.
of people who there was no reason to be killed. So yes, you're right. And we certainly need to acknowledge when something unjust was done. The point is, as soon as you do that, you have just made the point that there is no justice on the other side, internally, externally, in regard to the attacks, in regard to their own people. It makes it that much more obvious. And I just want to say thank you real quick to Jonathan Honig, who was in with a super chat. Super thanks. And appreciate that very much. Any dollars y'all put in to raise a question or just to show support, do go to support the Ayn Rand Center UK. And this is the place. This is the place to talk about what's going on over there, here, all around the world. I hope you're enjoying, I know you're enjoying these conversations, because when I am watching, I am enjoying them too, and being enlightened, but also knowing there are thinkers out there, kindred spirits. There are people who get it. And I appreciate that very much. I mentioned earlier there was an opinion piece in the Jerusalem Post that explains maybe some of what's going on in Ireland. I read it. I thought it was insightful. So let me just read a couple paragraphs from this real quick. Why does Ireland hate Israel? Underlying anti-Semitism, and they give examples of this. It's only one part of the explanation. You can view the Arab-Israel conflict solely through a distorted lens. That's another. We talk about that distorted lens. People have this idea about the history that somehow Israel took over land of a country that already respected rights and had property. which was actually land that was part of mandated Palestine. What do you mean mandated Palestine? Isn't that Palestine? No, it's a British protectorate. And the British, in combination with in working with the UN, gave that country a substantial part of it to the Jews after World War II. They were the ones in a position to do that. But it's interesting because anti-Semitism, why? We joke sometimes about, well, the Christians are just mad that the Jews killed Christ. Well, to some people, that's not a joke. Some of the roots of Ireland's present day anti-Israeli antipathy and traditional church anti-Semitism, well, Catholicism has been an integral part of Irish national identity. And only in the 1960s did the Second Vatican Council formally absolve the Jews of culpability in the crucifixion and its accompanying theologian anti-Semitism. Then they go on to give examples from an ADL survey, an Anti-Defamation League survey. 52% of the population agreed with the statement, well, Jews are more loyal to Israel than to this country, Jews in Ireland. 30% agreed, well, Jews still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust. 28% agree that Jews have too much power in the business world. And they go on, and the numbers get smaller, but they also get to be more fringe. 21% believe, quote, Jews have too much control over global affairs, unquote. I'm curious, let me start with you, John. Do you read these things and think this is real? Because I don't see in friends, family, people I work with, I don't see that kind of irrationality in anti-Semitism. And yet, look at the numbers and know it's out there. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's disappointing and terrible, but I think a lot of the anti-Semitism is just anti-success and anti-pride. It's had to start out with anti-Semitism because, in the early times of our history, we were more concrete bound. We tied causes to ethnicities and groups. But now we see it as ideas are the true things that are causing these things. So now people are, you see the move away from anti-Semitism to just general anti-capitalism. But I just think that the line that the Jews are, too in control and all that stuff it's no different than the conservatives complaining about the left being too in control. And, not that they're not necessarily, but it's just the conspiracy aspect of the whole thing seems to be what's driving a lot of it. The poll was ridiculous, though. Jews are too loyal to their own to Israel than they are to Ireland. Well, why the hell wouldn't you be when the Irish act the way they do towards the Jews? I wouldn't either. There's apparently a movement in one of the articles that was talking about a movement to boycott Jewish artists, and I'm trying to remember, I saved a little excerpt about it, but I'm not sure where I put it. So yeah, the anti-Semitism in Ireland just seems like a good mashup of old-fashioned Catholicism mixed with the New Age DEI. And when you put those two together, it's like, oh yeah, of course, the Jews are who we have to blame. It's so tribalistic.
It is.
They want to hold people guilty for the group that they belong to, depending on the group you belong to. And so all judgment comes down to groups, not individuals.
Right. Yeah, I'm a firm believer that when you see a widespread cultural phenomenon, there's usually one primary driving reason, but if it's that widespread, there's more than one. There's got to be multiple reasons for something to sustain. And we've got a question in the chat. Well, isn't anti-Semitism primarily a result of Catholic and Orthodox Christianity? Now, I'm no fan of I'm no fan of Christianity in general. So right away, my thought is, well, I could totally get behind that theory. But no, I don't think that that is the full explanation. That's why I like this opinion piece in the Jerusalem Post. Our writer says, yet underlying anti-Semitism is only one part of an explanation of Irish hostility. Viewing the Arab-Israel conflict solely through a distorted lens is another. All countries understand Israel through their own national prism. In the United States, the idea of a free society founded by immigrants fleeing persecution strongly resonates. Such an ethos can create an instinctive empathy for the Jewish state. By contrast, in much of Western Europe, post colonial guilt is ubiquitous. If Israel's detractors successfully portray Israel as a colonist, colonialist implant, they were put there by the Brits, anti-Israel sentiment naturally follows. And in the Republic of Ireland, the Irish historic experience is often unthinkingly and incorrectly transposed on the Arab-Israeli dispute. The Israelis seem doomed to play the part of the nefarious occupying British. Palestinians are in the role of the virtuous Irish, fighting for their independence. He goes on, and it's a good article that makes a good point, and I think that's definitely a part of it. I don't want to underplay the religious aspect. I think that is substantial, just like it's a substantial part of why there's no solution to what's going on in Gaza right now, the role that religion plays in that. And so it makes sense that that would come from a country like Ireland. The stereotypical Irish joke of, I think the way Hitchens used to tell it is a man is hiking through Ireland and he's coming up on a small town and he comes upon a sentry. And the sentry says, "Aye, stop. Are you Catholic or are you Protestant?" Because that was the war. People were killing each over that over in the past. And the man says, "No, I'm an atheist." And the sentry looks a little confused, looks for a moment. He says, "Are you a Catholic atheist or a Protestant atheist?" And we laugh, and that's a joke, but that stuff matters to so many people. They're still, even now, like I said, we can laugh about the idea of, yeah, they're still mad at the Jews for killing Christ. Some people really believe that stuff. So I appreciate the question in the chat. I do think that's an element, but as our opinion piece suggests, it's definitely not the whole story. It couldn't survive. It couldn't last that long without all of these other factors, all of these other pressures.
Yeah, I would add that Christianity started anti-Semitism and made a base of it. But whatever's going on now with the multiple ideologies interacting, it's keeping it going. Just like, it's just certain things from the religion you were brought up with probably carries over into your life and you don't even realize it. And I think this is kind of anti-Semitism is one of those cultural things that just is kept alive by certain aspects of the new ideology, but it was started by Christianity. So, they had all kinds of stories about the Jews and, they were mad that the Jews killed Jesus, even though what would Jesus have sacrificed himself for if they didn't kill him? So I don't know, they should be thanking the Jews, right?
I want to touch on that in a second,
Yes,
John, but I
please.
actually have to disagree with John a little bit. I don't think that Christians started anti-Semitism. Jew hatred predates even Christianity. I mean, if you go back, when Jews were spread out throughout, the Greeks, a lot of Greeks didn't like them. The Romans didn't like them. And then even with Christianity, of course, you have the Muslims are some of the biggest Jew haters on the planet. But John brought up a very interesting point that's always baffled me, right? But on a purely formal, logical basis, if I'm a Christian and I believe that I'm born into sin and there's nothing that I can do to atone for this sin, and I can never be a perfect being, and so somebody has to be sacrificed in order for me to make it to Candyland, then and there's the prophecy that this guy is going to come and he's going to be sacrificed so that I can go to heaven. He comes, he sacrificed. Now I can go to heaven, but I hate the people forever that sacrificed him, that I claim sacrificed him, because in reality, the Romans killed him. But so what would have happened if he didn't die? There would be no Christianity. It's very, very peculiar. But I suppose formal logic or logic of any kind or reality is not what such people are really concerned with.
I catch
Uh,
myself doing that every now and then with biblical stories too, that you take
just,
them seriously and then you say, oh, well, if this, then that, and that, and you end up,
I just want to make the point that, yeah, you're absolutely right, Michael, that it existed. I misspoke or misidentified by saying it started it. Christianity more institutionalized it or kind of brought everyone together and united them in their
It
hatred for
certainly
Jews.
added gas to the fire, no doubt about that.
Right.
well, I appreciate being on an episode with Michael and John again, because sometimes we seem to represent the troublemakers around here. And in regard to our opinions on these subjects, bringing in aspects that maybe some would regard as a distraction. But I want to say flat out, because it's not quite the top of the hour and because I can, this war has got to end. And it needs to end now. And there's only one way that that can happen. The organization that planned and executed the October 7th attacks, they need to release the hostages that they continue to this day to hold prisoner, and then they need to unconditionally surrender. And it is just that simple. Whatever else you think should happen, this much is clear. Hamas could end this today. Folks who are watching in the past half hour, these are the comments that the platform would not allow me to put in the chat. If some of you are trying to say these things, I hope that this resonates with you. They started this war and they refuse to end it, which they could do.
Who won't let you put it in the chat? I don't understand.
Oh, the
never...
YouTube platform would not allow me to type these in. You know, you can type them in, but then you refresh the page and you see they never actually got posted. And that's cool. I'm not criticizing the platform at all.
Oh,
you
wow,
got to have algorithms. You got to have some way to stop stuff from coming through. But yeah, if you ever open up two windows so you can see your chat coming in as it scrolls through, you can also see what never made it through.
Oh,
it's
wow.
cool. It's all good. And hey, now that we're live, I can say these things. Hamas started every time you use the word Hamas, it seems. Hamas started this war. They refused to end it. And this tragic, and I'm going to say it, tragic loss of life. My heart is sick when I think of 25,000 people dead in Gaza. It's all on the hands of Hamas. Hamas didn't kill them. Yes, they did. They started this war. This tragic loss of life on both sides is entirely on their heads. And, you know, I totally get both sides of this issue more, I think, than our critics fully understand. I get it, but there's no other way out. I know they're imagining. Here's what they're imagining. They're imagining Israel somehow bowing to the international pressure and Israel surrendering. They're imagining that on the premise that, well, October 7th may have been extreme, but Hamas and Gaza, they weren't left with any alternatives. But, you know, even if that were true, what the hell else did they expect was going to happen? If you attack a nation in the manner they were attacked, I don't even want to go on anymore with that because I won't be able to keep it free of profanity and on a gentleman's level. But what the hell else do you expect to happen following what happened on October 7th? This war needs to end, and it needs to end now. And the only way it's going to end, because apparently Hamas refuses to give up and do the right thing and save their citizens what they're going through, is that Israel needs to win this war. They need to end it. They need to end it decisively in a way in which the people who are defeated will not question that defeat. They need to know that they were wrong, that they failed, that they must never, ever think about doing this again, and that they need to give some thought to joining the 21st fucking century. Just my thoughts on that. I don't know, John and Mike, you might disagree with some of that, but
I think maybe get a shirt, 21 FC, 21st fucking century.
I don't see any other way out of it. You know, that alternative that our friends are imagining, they're not on the table. You know, you don't get to do what was done on October 7th.
Okay, can we address this, what this says?
Yes, please. So,
okay.
Oh, I see. Yeah, we have another comment in the chat. The Irish are pro-Palestinian, but they're not anti-Semitic. Please get that in your heads. They are not the same thing.
Okay.
I
Then
absolutely want to hear that because I have heard that before. I'm not anti-Semitic. I just think the Jews are entirely wrong and they're the bad guys in this. But it's
yeah.
not because they're Jewish.
Yeah. Well, why not shake the hands of basketball players then? What's going on there? The basketball players aren't firing guns. The basketball players aren't involved in war. So why not shake their hands? What's the problem? If it's just a matter of you're pro-Palestinian, be friendly to basketball players. It's that simple. And I'm not saying, look, I'm not one that says every critic of Israel is anti-Semitic, but I do think that anti-Jews hide behind the we're pro-Palestinian or we're just, we don't support Israel line way too much. And it's unfortunate because it's sometimes difficult to decipher a legitimate critic that I just happen to intellectually disagree with from the vile filth that just hates Jews.
Yeah, I that resonates with me because I think like you, Michael, I'm no fan of religion. So when somebody tells me they're Jewish, I think, oh, that's a shame. Oh no, wait, what am I talking about? I'm just talking about their religion. It turns out, of course, there are people who are culturally Jewish
Yes.
and aren't religious at all. But I totally get that. John, what do you think?
Yeah, again, to echo that, if they're not anti-Israeli, then why is there a boycott, an anti-Israeli boycott movement actively harassing any institution that has the temerity to host Israeli cultural figures? The result is that Israeli artists, actors, musicians, and dancers are simply not welcome in the Republic of Ireland. The citizens of no other country are facing such systematic, open-ended discrimination, but they're just pro-Palestinian. Sure. Then go give money to Palestinians and keep your mouth shut about Israel if that's the truth.
Yeah, they could have just funded,
Right.
Anwar and not had that despicable display against the basketball team or the other litany that you just presented.
Yeah. It
Yes, yes.
being pro-Palestinian almost always has an undercurrent of anti-Semitism. Not always, but many times, because you see the double, whenever you see that double standard applied, you know that that's what's at play underneath.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate. There's great conversation going on in the chat, folks. If you're hearing this after the fact, take a look at the chat. Jamie in the chat says, "Good stuff. I happen to be of Irish extraction. Over the last 10 years, I've watched Ireland commit moral suicide in the same way much of the rest of Europe, unmoored and depraved." Yeah, it is sad to see what's going on culturally in Europe.
Do you think
And,
maybe the
and
Irish are just mad because uh, Britain gave the Israelis Israel and they had to actually fight for their country from Britain? I think they're maybe just a little jealous and so they hold it against Israel.
as I say, I don't think there's one single explanation, and I'm sure that that
Telling
is
you,
a part of it.
dealing with multiple people with mixed philosophies, so the combinations are really endless.
Yeah, they've got more than one chip on their shoulder, that's for sure. Well, folks, thank you for joining us. We appreciate this conversation. We think, oh, Irish anti-Semitism, yet another element in the ongoing on the ongoing crusades against Israel in this fight. This conversation is important, and it's important to keep this conversation going. So if you're not already a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK, I would ask that you please consider becoming a member. You can do that on the Ayn Rand Center UK's website, aynrandcenter.co.uk. You can also become a member of the YouTube channel. That'll get you access to a few feeds you wouldn't normally be able to see on the channel, as well as some fun stuff. There's some of these emojis that you see people using, as well as shows that are exclusive to the membership. Either way, we appreciate you listening. We appreciate your support. Those of you who support us, we appreciate your criticism. So those of you who criticize us, it helps us strengthen our intellectual muscles. John, Michael, thank you. Thank you very much for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank
And,
you.
this isn't over. It's not going to be over until Israel wins it. There are 1,500 dead people who need. I was going to say that they need to be But it's not about the 1500. It is about the war that was started. The war needs to be ended. It needs to be done by an Israel victory. There's no other way to have peace in the area. And hopefully I know that conversations like these are part of what is going to make it possible for the allies of Israel to continue to show some backbone more than Joe Biden did this week. So thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the conversation, Michael. Thank you, John. And thank you to all of you who are watching and listening. And we will do this again. Join us tomorrow at 5:30 UK time. That's 12:30 on the East Coast. You can change that to wherever you are for the Daily Objective. And again, half an hour afterward for the reality show. And we will do this again. Thank you. As always, we say good premises. Check your premises. Be well.